If he touched her one more time, someone would die tonight. The thought cut through the velvet music, the crystal laughter, and the illusion of elegance, like a blade. A pregnant woman lay on the marble floor of the Astoria Hall ballroom, blood on her lip, one hand clutching her belly, while the most powerful man in the room stood over her, furious and untouchable, and no one moved. The gala had been advertised as a night of generosity, a charity fundraiser for children's hospitals in Manhattan, hosted beneath chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars. Politicians smiled for cameras. Investors shook hands over seven-figure promises. Wealth flowed as freely as champagne. This was the world Jonathan Reed ruled without question. At 42, the founder and chief executive of Reed Dynamics was not just rich, he was feared. His company powered half the financial infrastructure on the East Coast. His name could end careers with a phone call. People did not cross Jonathan Reed. They learned to look away. Emily Reed learned that lesson the hard way. At 29, 6 months pregnant, she stood beside her husband in a pale silk gown that hid bruises no one ever saw. Her smile was practiced fragile, held together by fear. When a server brushed past and champagne spilled onto Jonathan's tailored jacket, the room froze for a fraction of a second. Jonathan's face tightened, not in embarrassment, but in rage. His hand came down hard across Emily's face, the sound sharp and unmistakable. She fell stunned, her body hitting the floor as the music swelled to cover it. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. No gasp, no shout, no help. Every guest understood the same unspoken rule. Interfere and you disappear. Contracts vanish, donations dry up, doors close forever. So they stared into glasses. They checked their phones. They pretended nothing had happened while Emily lay trembling at Jonathan's feet. From the edge of the ballroom near a service corridor, no one noticed Michael Carter stopped moving. His mop bucket stood beside him, untouched, the water inside, reflecting the chaos like a warped mirror. At 34, Michael wore the gray uniform of the night cleaning crew, a man trained by necessity to blend into walls. He had spent years perfecting invisibility, lowering his eyes, quieting his steps, surviving by being overlooked. To the people in this room, he was furniture. Replaceable, unimportant. But the sight of Emily on the floor shattered something in him. He saw more than a fallen woman. He saw a memory he could not outrun. 8 years ago, he had watched his own wife struggle up the stairs while pregnant, one hand on the railing, the other on her swollen belly. He remembered kneeling to tie her shoes, whispering promises he could not keep. He remembered the night she left and the years that followed, raising their son Ethan alone in a cramped apartment in Queens, measuring life in grocery bills and bedtime stories. Michael's heart hammered as Jonathan grabbed Emily's wrist, dragging her halfway upright. She whimpered a sound so small it barely reached the crowd. That was when Michael stepped forward. He did not plan it. He did not feel brave. His legs shook as he crossed the polished floor, each step heavier than the last. His voice came out hoarse but steady enough to cut through the noise. "Sir, please stop. She's pregnant." The words hit the room like a dropped glass. Heads turned. Jonathan Reed slowly faced him, disbelief flickering before hardening into contempt. His gaze swept over Michael's uniform, the scuffed shoes, the janitor badge clipped to his chest. A laugh escaped him, low and dangerous. "Who do you think you are?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think anyone here will believe a janitor?" Michael swallowed. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to apologize, to disappear. He thought of Ethan's drawing taped to their refrigerator, a stick figure man with a cape and crooked letters spelling "Dad is my hero." He thought of what his son would learn if he walked away now. He stood his ground. "I do not care who believes me," he said. I care that you are hurting her." Jonathan's hand struck him before anyone could react. The slap echoed through the ballroom, a sound too raw to ignore. Michael staggered, but did not fall. His cheek burned, his ears rang, but something else settled inside him, calm and unyielding. He straightened, meeting Jonathan's eyes, without fear. The billionaire leaned close, his breath heavy with anger and expensive cologne. "You are finished," Jonathan hissed. "I will make sure you never work in this city again." "Maybe," Michael replied quietly, "but I will still be able to look my son in the eye." A murmur rippled through the crowd, quickly smothered by fear. Jonathan sneered, convinced he had won. He did not notice Michael's hand slip into his pocket. He did not see the phone come out the camera light, flick on. Michael raised it, his hand shaking but resolute. "If no one will believe me," he said, "then they will see it." For the first time that night, uncertainty crossed Jonathan Reed's face. Around them, the music faltered. A few guests shifted uneasily. Somewhere in the back, a phone was raised, then another. The illusion of absolute power cracked just slightly under the weight of one man's refusal to stay silent. Michael did not know it yet. But in that moment, the story had already escaped the room. What began as a single step forward from a man everyone ignored was about to ignite a chain of events that would tear down an empire. And it all started here on a marble floor with a pregnant woman, bleeding a janitor standing tall, and a truth that refused to stay buried. Michael Carter did not sleep that night. After the gala finally dissolved into forced smiles and whispered damage control, he returned to his small apartment in Queens just before dawn, his cheeks still throbbing, his hands trembling as he unlocked the door. The city outside was quiet in that strange, suspended hour, when night had not fully surrendered to morning. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of detergent and toast. Ethan lay asleep on the couch, curled beneath a thin blanket, one arm wrapped around his battered stuffed bear. Michael stood there for a long moment, watching his son breathe, grounding himself in the simple rise and fall of that small chest. He cleaned the cut on his lip in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back. There was a bruise blooming purple along his jaw, but what unsettled him more was his own expression. It was not fear. It was resolve. He whispered an apology to the empty room, not for what he had done, but for what he knew was coming. By the time the sun edged through the blinds, Michael had already accepted that his life had shifted onto a path he could not step away from. Across the river, in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Emily Reed lay awake in a private bedroom larger than Michael's entire apartment. Her body ached in places she had learned not to name. A doctor had examined her quietly after the gala, ensuring the baby was still alive, still fighting. Emily stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment that would not release its grip on her mind. The slap, the fall, and then the voice. Calm, ordinary, unafraid. A man she had never seen before, stepping forward when everyone else looked away. For 3 years, Emily had believed silence was survival. Jonathan had taught her that. Every time she questioned him, every time she resisted, he reminded her of who he was and who she was not. He controlled the money, the narrative, the truth. He told her no one would ever believe her, and she had believed him, until a janitor proved him wrong in front of hundreds of witnesses. Jonathan Reed, meanwhile, was already at work. By 8 in the morning, he sat at the head of a polished conference table flanked by lawyers, public relations executives, and senior advisors. His expression was composed, immaculate, as if the night before had been nothing more than an inconvenience. Screens glowed with headlines that were vague but dangerous. Incident at charity gala. Allegations unconfirmed. Read dynamics, declines comment. We erase it, Jonathan said flatly. All of it. The lawyers nodded. Phones buzzed. Orders were given. Security footage flagged. Employee accounts frozen. Contracts reviewed. Jonathan had spent decades mastering this ritual. A problem appeared. Money moved. The problem vanished. He had ended lawsuits, silenced whistleblowers, reshaped reality with precision. A janitor with a phone did not frighten him. Not yet. Back in Queens, Michael woke Ethan, gently helping him get dressed for school as he did every morning. They ate cereal at the small kitchen table. Ethan chattered about a spelling test and a science project involving magnets. Michael smiled, nodded, laughed at the right moments, but his mind raced ahead. He dropped Ethan off at school, watching him disappear through the gates, then sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel. His phone vibrated. A message from the Astoria Hall management appeared on the screen. You are hereby suspended pending investigation for disruptive behavior during a private event. Michael exhaled slowly. He had expected as much. Another message followed this one from an unknown number. Delete the video. This is your only warning. His stomach tightened, but he did not reply. Instead, he drove to a small cafe near the river, the kind of place where nobody asked questions. He opened his phone, trying to access the recording from the night before. The file refused to load. His heart sank. He tried again. Error. Corrupted file. Gone. They did it already, he whispered. For a moment, despair threatened to crush him. He imagined Jonathan's satisfied smile, the effortless efficiency with which truth could be erased. Michael rested his forehead against the cold table, the weight of his choices pressing down hard. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, a different name appeared. Daniel Brooks. Daniel had been the head chef at the Astoria Hall for nearly a decade, a quiet man with tired eyes and hands scarred from years of work. They had spoken only in passing before. A nod. A shared coffee. Leftover food slipped into a bag for Ethan. That night at the gala, Daniel had seen everything. Meet me. Same cafe. Now. Daniel arrived 10 minutes later, his apron replaced by a jacket, his face drawn but determined. Without a word, he slid into the chair across from Michael and placed a small flash drive on the table between them. They wiped the public feeds, Daniel said, but not everything. Michael stared at the drive as if it were fragile glass. What is it? Security footage. Not perfect, but clear enough. He pushed her. He hit you. The room watching. I copied it before the order came down. Michael's throat tightened. Using this could destroy them both. Daniel knew it. They sat in silence, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. If we do nothing, Daniel said quietly, she goes back to him. And this becomes just another rumor. Michael thought of Emily's eyes on the floor, wide with fear and hope intertwined. He nodded once. We use it. They did not have a plan. They had no lawyers, no connections, no safety net. What they had was truth and the internet. That evening, after Ethan fell asleep, Michael set up his old laptop on the kitchen counter. The camera quality was poor. The lighting was harsh. He did not care. He looked into the lens, the bruise on his face impossible to miss. My name is Michael Carter, he began. I am a janitor. And last night, I saw a billionaire beat his pregnant wife. He spoke slowly, deliberately, telling the story without embellishment, without anger. He named Jonathan Reed. He described the slap, the fall, the silence. He admitted his fear. He admitted the consequences. Then he ended with one sentence that came from the deepest part of him. I did not speak because I am brave. I spoke because I am a father. He uploaded the video and turned off his phone. When he lay down beside his sleeping son, exhaustion finally overtook him. He did not see the views climbing. He did not hear the city awakening to a truth it could no longer ignore. But somewhere far above him, in towers of glass and steel, panic was beginning to spread. Emily Reed learned how to survive by becoming small. In the days after the gala, she remained inside the penthouse curtains, drawn guards stationed outside her bedroom door, under the excuse of protection. Jonathan did not speak to her. He did not need to. His silence was more frightening than his rage. It meant calculation. It meant something was being arranged beyond her reach. A private nurse came twice a day, checking her blood pressure, the baby's heartbeat, writing notes that Emily was not allowed to read. The doctor spoke only when Jonathan was present. Everything was framed as concern, as care. But Emily knew the truth. This was containment. She was being managed like a liability. At night, when the city lights bled through the curtains, Emily replayed the gala in her mind. Not the slap, not the fall. Those were familiar. What haunted her was the moment after. The moment a stranger stepped forward. She could still hear his voice steady despite the fear. "Sir, please stop." She had spent 3 years believing no one would ever say those words for her. Before she became Emily Reed, she had been Emily Walker, 24 years old, ambitious, hopeful, invisible, in a different way. She met Jonathan Reed at a technology conference in San Francisco, where she worked as a junior communications associate for a small startup. Jonathan was the keynote speaker, magnetic and brilliant, talking about innovation as if he were inventing the future in real time. After his speech, he found her in the crowd, praised her questions, asked her to dinner. She felt chosen, seen. The courtship was a whirlwind. Flowers delivered every morning, private flights, promises whispered late at night about partnership and legacy. When he proposed 3 months later on a balcony overlooking the Pacific, she said yes without hesitation. Her friends were skeptical. Her parents urged caution. Jonathan laughed it off, telling her they were jealous of what they did not understand. She believed him. The first change came quietly, almost gently. He began asking where she was going, who she was texting. He framed it as worry, as love. When she laughed too long with a waiter, his hand tightened around hers. When she wore a dress he disliked that he asked her to change. The first slap came during an argument about visiting her parents. It was quick, shocking, followed immediately by tears and apologies. He knelt, begged, swore it would never happen again. Emily told herself it was stress, that powerful men carried heavy burdens. But it did happen again and again. Each time the apologies grew thinner, the justifications colder. "You made me angry. You embarrassed me. You know how people watch us." He took her phone. He installed tracking software. He cut her off from friends under the guise of privacy. The mansion became a gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating. When Emily discovered she was pregnant, she wept with relief. This will change him, she thought. This will soften him. For a brief moment, it seemed true. Jonathan smiled more. He placed a hand on her belly in public. But in private, the violence returned with a cruelty she had not known. When dinner was late, he shoved her. When she cried, he mocked her weakness. Once, during an argument on the stairs, he pushed her so hard she tumbled down several steps, clutching her stomach in terror. He stood above her and said calmly, "If you ever try to leave me, I will kill you. And no one will stop me." Emily believed him because everything around her reinforced the lie. The wealth, the influence, the silence of everyone who depended on him. She stopped dreaming of escape. She focused on survival. She learned how to fall without hitting her stomach. She learned how to hide bruises under silken makeup. She learned how to smile. The gala was her last attempt. She spilled the champagne on purpose. She needed someone, anyone, to see. She had not expected it to be a janitor. On the third morning after the incident, Emily overheard two guards speaking outside her door. Transfer at 9-1 said, "Private facility, no press." Emily's pulse quickened. She knew what that meant. Isolation, control, erasure. Panic surged through her, sharp and breathless. She needed help, and she needed it now. She found a phone hidden in the back of a drawer, an old device Jonathan had forgotten. Her hands shook as she turned it on. Social media exploded onto the screen. Michael Carter's face filled it, bruised but unbroken, speaking directly into the camera. Millions of views. Comments pouring in faster than she could read. Believe him. Protect her. Justice. Tears streamed down her face. For the first time in years, the world was looking at the right man. There was a knock at the door. Emily hid the phone under her pillow as Jonathan entered, flanked by a lawyer. He smiled as if nothing were wrong, his voice smooth and reassuring. "We are going somewhere quiet for a few days," he said. "For your health. For the baby." Emily looked at him and felt something new rise beneath the fear. Not courage. Not yet. But possibility. Across the city, in a cramped apartment filled with camera equipment and stacks of notebooks, Sarah Collins watched Michael's video for the 5th time. At 31, she was an independent investigative journalist with a reputation for chasing stories no one else would touch. She had lost her job at a major paper 2 years earlier after exposing corruption tied to a powerful donor. Since then, she survived on freelance work and stubbornness. This story was different. It was raw, unpolished, dangerous, and undeniably real. Sarah paused the video, zooming in on the background on the woman on the floor. Emily Reed. She recognized her instantly. Society pages, charity galas, the perfect wife. Sarah's stomach twisted. She had seen this pattern before. Powerful man, trapped woman, everyone complicit. She found Michael's contact information in the comments and dialed the number without hesitation. When he answered, his voice cautious, she spoke quickly, urgently. "My name is Sarah Collins. I am a journalist. I believe you. And if we do not act fast, they are going to make her disappear." Michael listened in silence, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. He thought of the guards, the mansion, the money stacked against them. "What can we do?" he asked. Sarah exhaled. "We get to her. We let her speak. Once she does, they cannot put the truth back in the box." As the call ended, Emily Reed sat alone on her bed, one hand on her belly, feeling her child move inside her. Outside her door, plans were being finalized to lock her away. But somewhere beyond the walls, strangers were fighting for her, guided by the courage of a man everyone else had ignored. For the first time in 3 years, Emily allowed herself to believe that the silence might finally be breaking. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet fear, a place where voices softened and footsteps echoed longer than they should. Long white corridors stretched beneath cold fluorescent lights, every sound magnified, every movement watched. Emily Reed lay in room 427, propped against stiff pillows, one hand resting over her swollen belly as if shielding the life inside her. Outside the door, 2 men in dark suits stood motionless, not doctors, not family, but sentinels of control. They were there to make sure she did not speak, to make sure the truth never left this floor. It was just past 6 in the morning, that fragile hour when night had not yet surrendered to day. The city beyond the hospital windows stirred, unaware that something irreversible was about to happen. Emily's heart raced each time footsteps slowed near her door. Jonathan had not arrived yet, but she felt his presence anyway, heavy and inevitable. Sarah's warning echoed in her mind like a ticking clock. Once they move you, it is over. This was the last window, the last breath before silence returned. Sending the message had felt like stepping into darkness without knowing if there was ground beneath her. Emily's fingers shook as she typed the words on the old phone hidden beneath her pillow. I want to meet you. Room 427. Do not tell anyone. She pressed send, then stared at the screen until it went black, wondering if she had just signed her own death sentence or finally cracked open her cage. Michael Carter parked his aging pickup 2 blocks away from the hospital, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. Dawn painted the sky in dull gray, the air thick with anticipation. He sat still for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, forcing his breathing to slow. Mrs. Alvarez had agreed to watch Ethan a few more hours, her eyes filled with concern as she noticed the bruise still dark on his cheek. Be careful, she had said. Michael promised her he would, even though he knew promises meant very little now. Sarah Collins waited near the side entrance, a hood pulled low over her hair, a small backpack slung across her shoulder. She looked calm, focused, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. This was not her first confrontation with power, but she knew this one carried a different kind of danger. When Michael approached, she did not waste words. Ready? She asked softly. Michael nodded. His throat was too tight for anything else. Inside, they were met by Linda, a nurse in her early 40s, whose tired eyes held a quiet resolve. Years earlier, she had survived a marriage that nearly erased her, and when she saw Michael's video, something inside her refused to stay silent. She guided them through a narrow service corridor, speaking in low tones. 2 guards in the main lobby, family only. But there is another way. Her steps were confident, her choice already made. The elevator ride felt endless as the numbers climbed one by one. Michael felt the weight of every floor, every second pressing against his chest. This was no longer about exposure or reputation. This was about stepping directly into a man's carefully guarded territory. When the doors opened, Linda led them down the corridor and stopped outside room 427. She knocked softly 3 deliberate taps, then waited. Come in, a weak voice answered. Emily looked smaller in daylight, the bruises on her face no longer hidden by evening glamour. Her hair was loosely tied back, her skin pale, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. When she saw Michael, recognition washed over her, and tears spilled freely, unstoppable. You came, she whispered, disbelief and gratitude tangled in her voice. Michael nodded, emotion tightening his chest. Yes, Mom. We did. Sarah stepped forward, her tone gentle but unwavering. Emily, my name is Sarah Collins. I am a reporter. We want to help you, but we need the truth. All of it. Emily's gaze darted toward the door, fear flashing sharp and raw. He will kill me if I speak. She said the words heavy with certainty built over years. Michael moved closer, lowering himself to her level, his voice calm and steady. He cannot hurt you when the world is watching. You are not alone anymore. Something inside Emily finally gave way, not in fragments, but in a flood. Years of silence collapsed into quiet, relentless tears that shook her body. She nodded slowly, gathering what strength she had left. Okay. She began to speak, halting at first, then stronger, recounting how she met Jonathan, how love had turned into possession, how apologies had become threats. She spoke of phones taken, cameras installed, doors locked, her identity slowly erased, while the world admired her husband's success. Michael listened, jaw-clenched, anger simmering beneath his controlled stillness. Sarah recorded everything without interruption, letting Emily guide the story, letting the truth emerge at its own pace. This was not an interview. It was a confession long overdue. When Emily reached the night of the gala, her voice cracked. "I spilled the champagne on purpose," she said. "I needed someone to see. I thought maybe in public he would stop, or someone else would." Her eyes met Michael's. "You did." Emily reached for the drawer beside her bed and pulled out a small flash drive, holding it like a fragile lifeline. "This is everything," she said. "Home footage, audio recordings, photos, dates. I kept it in case I did not survive." Sarah took the drive carefully, understanding its weight. "This changes everything," she said quietly, already knowing it did. A sharp voice cut through the moment from the hallway. "Room 427. Heavy footsteps approached fast. "They are here," Linda warned under her breath. The door swung open as 2 guards pushed inside, their presence filling the room. "You are not authorized to be here. Leave now." Sarah stepped forward without hesitation. "We are journalists. You do not have the authority to remove us." One guard sneered, reaching for his phone. "We have orders." Before he could move, Emily spoke, her voice weak but firm. "I want them here. This is my room." The guards froze, unprepared for defiance from the woman they were meant to silence. Linda stepped in, her badge visible. "Hospital policy states the patient decides who may enter. If you interfere, I will call hospital security." For a moment, the room held its breath. Then the guards backed away, anger simmering beneath forced restraint. As the door closed, Emily exhaled shakily, a tremor running through her body. Sarah stopped the recording and met Michael's eyes. They had what they came for. The truth was finally out, and there would be no putting it back into the dark. The silence inside the Astoria Hall did not shatter all at once. It fractured slowly, like ice, spreading hairline cracks before breaking apart. After Michael raised his phone, after Jonathan's certainty wavered for the first time, a strange tension settled over the room. Guests glanced at one another, unsure whether to keep pretending or finally acknowledge what was happening. The music faltered, then stopped. Emily remained on the floor, trembling, while the man who owned the room realized control was slipping through his fingers. From the doorway near the kitchen, Daniel Brooks had watched everything. At 39, he had spent nearly half his life in professional kitchens, learning discipline, silence, obedience. Hospitality had rules no one wrote down. Do not interfere. Do not question the wealthy. Do your job and go home. Daniel had followed those rules while raising 3 children and supporting a wife fighting cancer, telling himself survival mattered more than principle. But watching Michael stand alone, watching a pregnant woman bleed while power went unchallenged, something inside him finally snapped. Daniel untied his apron and set it on the counter. The knife in his hand, meant to create beauty from raw things, clattered softly onto steel. He walked into the ballroom with deliberate steps, his heart beat loud in his ears. When he reached Michael's side, he stopped and faced Jonathan Reed. His voice was calm, but it carried. "This needs to stop," he said. Jonathan turned sharply, irritation flaring. "And who are you supposed to be?" Daniel met his gaze without blinking. "I am the head chef here, and I am not looking away." A murmur rippled through the crowd, sharper this time. 2 men now stood against Jonathan, neither rich, neither powerful, neither willing to back down. Jonathan scoffed, but his confidence thinned. "You are both finished," he snapped. "I will destroy you." Daniel pulled out his phone and lifted it beside Michael's. "Now there are 2 of us recording," he said quietly. "Do you want to keep going?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Something changed then. A woman near the back raised her phone. Then another, and another. Within moments, glowing screens dotted the room like small defiant lights. Jonathan Reed's empire had been built on image, on the careful curation of perception. And now that image was cracking in real time. His jaw tightened as he scanned the room, realizing how many witnesses he no longer controlled. He adjusted his jacket, forcing a smile that fooled no one. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "Emily, get up. We are leaving." Emily did not move. Her breathing was shallow, her hands shaking as she cradled her belly. Daniel knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "You do not have to go with him. We can call an ambulance." She looked at him, fear still present, but something else flickering beneath it. "He cannot hurt you here," Daniel continued. "Not now." Security hesitated, torn between authority and optics. Orders whispered into headsets went unanswered. Jonathan took a step back, and then another, calculating his exit. As he turned toward the doors, someone called for medical assistance. Paramedics arrived, swiftly kneeling beside Emily, their presence grounding, undeniable. As they lifted her onto a stretcher, Emily looked at Michael and Daniel. "Thank you," she whispered the words, carrying a weight neither man would ever forget. When the ambulance doors closed and the sirens faded into the night, the room stood frozen in the aftermath. Jonathan had left without looking back, but the damage followed him out. Within hours, messages flooded Michael's phone. Some were filled with praise, others carried threats sharp enough to chill his blood. Daniel received a call from management before he even made it home. Suspension, pending review, violating protocol. He laughed bitterly as he hung up. The rules had never protected anyone who mattered. Michael returned to his apartment near dawn, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. Ethan slept peacefully, unaware that his father's world had just been set on fire. Michael sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the dark screen of his phone, knowing the storm had only begun. Somewhere in the city, lawyers were already working to erase him. But somewhere else, truth was spreading faster than money ever could. For the first time in years, Michael did not feel invisible. He felt afraid, yes, but also certain. What he had done could not be undone. Courage had stepped into the light, and it had brought others with it. And no matter what came next, the silence that once protected power had finally been broken. The morning after the gala did not arrive gently. It came heavy, relentless, and unforgiving, pressing down on Michael Carter the moment he opened his eyes. His phone vibrated non-stop on the kitchen counter, the sound sharp against the quiet of the small apartment. Unknown numbers stacked across the screen. Voicemails filled faster than he could delete them. Texts poured in from strangers who knew his name, his face, his place in a story that no longer belonged to him alone. Michael did not answer. He stood at the sink, staring at his reflection, the bruise on his cheek, dark and unmistakable proof that the night had been real. An email arrived just after 7. The subject line was brief, clinical, final. Termination of employment. Michael read the words, slowly feeling each one land. He was dismissed effective immediately for violating confidentiality and disrupting a private event. No acknowledgement of violence, no mention of what he had stopped, just consequences. He set the phone down, closed his eyes, and breathed through the panic, tightening his chest. Losing the job meant losing stability. Rent, food, security. It meant facing his son with answers he did not yet have. Ethan padded into the kitchen in socked feet, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He smiled when he saw his father. Michael forced one back, pouring cereal into a chipped bowl, moving through routine like a lifeline. They talked about school, about a math quiz, about a drawing Ethan wanted to finish later. Michael listened, nodded, asked questions, storing every ordinary moment, as if he might need it to survive what was coming. When he dropped Ethan at school, Michael sat in his truck afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, until his knuckles whitened. He let himself feel fear, then just for a moment. Daniel Brooks received his own message before noon. Years of loyalty dissolved into a paragraph of legal language, his position terminated for acting beyond authority. He stared at the screen, then laughed softly, a sound stripped of humor. He called Michael immediately. They met at the same small cafe near the river, choosing the corner table where no one listened too closely. Both men looked older than they had 2 days earlier, the weight of exposure etched into their faces. They deleted it, Daniel said quietly, eyes scanning the room. Michael's stomach dropped. He pulled out his phone, opening the file he had watched so many times it felt burned into his memory. The screen stalled, then flashed an error. Unavailable. Corrupted. Gone. Jonathan Reed had moved faster than either of them had anticipated, using the machinery he had perfected over decades. Erase the proof. Control the narrative. Let the truth suffocate quietly. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow everything. Without evidence, Michael's words could be dismissed as attention-seeking. A janitor's accusation against a billionaire. The outcome felt predetermined. Daniel watched him carefully, then reached into his jacket and placed a small flash drive on the table between them. I copied the internal security footage before they wiped the system, he said. It is not perfect, but it shows what matters. Michael stared at the drive, understanding both its power and its danger. Possessing it could invite lawsuits, retaliation, worse. Not using it would condemn Emily to silence. That night, after Ethan fell asleep clutching his stuffed bear, Michael opened his old laptop. The fan whined loudly, the screen flickered, but it held. He sat at the kitchen counter, the overhead light harsh and unforgiving, and looked into the camera. He did not rehearse. He did not soften the truth. He spoke plainly, naming Jonathan Reed, describing the violence, the silence, the cost. He spoke about losing his job, about fear, about raising a son who deserved better lessons than obedience to power. When he finished, he stared at the screen for a long moment, then pressed upload. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, the videos surged through social platforms, shared by strangers, debated by commentators, dissected by skeptics. Views climbed into the hundreds of thousands, then into the millions. Support poured in alongside threats. Messages warned him to back down, to think about his child, to remember who he was up against. Emails from lawyers arrived, their tone cold and precise, accusing him of defamation, theft of proprietary material, malicious intent. Michael turned off his phone, unable to absorb any more. He sat beside Ethan's bed, listening to his son's steady breathing, the sound anchoring him against rising panic. For the first time since the gala, doubt crept in. Had he gone too far? Had he made a choice that would put his child in danger? He pressed his forehead against the wall, fighting the urge to undo what could not be undone. Courage felt heavy now, less like a victory and more like a burden he had to carry carefully. Across the city, Sarah Collins watched the numbers climb with a practiced eye. She understood momentum, understood the point at which a story became unstoppable. Jonathan Reed could erase files, intimidate employees, flood the internet with counter-narratives, but he could not control public attention once it locked onto a truth this clear. Sarah began making calls, lining up interviews, gathering documentation, building a structure strong enough to withstand attacks. This was no longer about virality. This was about accountability. Jonathan Reed spent the night in his office lights, burning high above the city. His phone rang constantly. Advisors urged restraint. Lawyers pushed for silence. Public relations teams drafted statements that avoided responsibility while expressing concern. Jonathan listened, calculating, searching for leverage. But each strategy collapsed under the same reality. The story had escaped his control. The janitor he dismissed as irrelevant had become the focal point of a national conversation. Michael did not feel triumphant. He felt exposed, exhausted, and uncertain of what tomorrow would bring. Yet beneath the fear, something steady remained. He had spoken when it mattered. He had chosen action over silence. Whatever consequences followed the truth was no longer his, alone to protect. It belonged to everyone who had watched, believed, and refused to look away. The momentum did not slow. It multiplied, accelerated, and slipped beyond anyone's control. What had begun as a single video recorded by a man no one noticed became a national reckoning. By the third night, Michael Carter's face appeared on every major network, frozen in the moment he raised his phone instead of lowering his eyes. Commentators argued, analysts speculated, but the public response was unmistakable. This was not entertainment. This was exposure. Jonathan Reed watched the world turn against him from the top floor of his Manhattan headquarters, the city he once commanded stretching beneath his windows like a conquered map. His legal team filled the conference room, voices, overlapping words sharp with urgency. They spoke of narrative management, strategic silence, controlled releases. Jonathan listened, jaw-clenched fingers tapping the glass table. For the first time in decades, money was not fixing the problem fast enough. Every hour brought another headline, another ally stepping back, another crack in the image he had built with ruthless precision. Investors began pulling out quietly at first, then openly. Reed Dynamics stock dipped, then plunged. A major state contract was suspended pending investigation. Board members demanded explanations Jonathan could no longer provide. Employees posted resignations on professional networks, each message more damaging than the last. "I cannot work for a company led by a man who does this." Silence, the same silence Jonathan once relied on, now worked against him. Then Emily Reed spoke. The interview aired just after primetime released through an independent outlet Sarah Collins had secured. Emily appeared on screen without makeup, her face pale but steady, one hand resting over her belly. Her voice trembled in the opening seconds, then settled into something stronger. She spoke of love that turned into control of fear, disguised as loyalty, of a marriage that became a prison built from money and threats. She described learning how to fall in ways that protected her unborn child. She described being told again and again that no one would ever believe her. She did not cry for sympathy. She did not ask for forgiveness. She told the truth. Then the evidence followed. Security footage from inside the house. Audio recordings of threats spoken calmly, almost casually. Medical reports. Photographs time-stamped over years. Each piece landed like a weight, crushing any remaining doubt. Social media erupted. The conversation shifted from accusation to accountability. The question was no longer whether Jonathan Reed had done it, but how long he had been allowed to. By morning, Reed Dynamics was in free fall. Sponsors withdrew. Partners froze operations. The board convened an emergency meeting and voted to remove Jonathan Reed as chief executive pending investigation. The man who had built his empire on control watched it unravel in silence, his name now synonymous with exposure instead of power. The arrest came 48 hours later. Police vehicles lined the street outside Reed Dynamics headquarters, red and blue lights reflecting off the glass facade. Reporters gathered in a dense wall of cameras and microphones. When Jonathan Reed was escorted out in handcuffs, the crowd surged forward, flashes exploding like lightning. He did not speak. His face, once confident and commanding, looked hollow, stripped of certainty. The charges were read clearly and publicly: assault, domestic abuse, threats to life. Emily filed for divorce that same day, along with a restraining order. She signed the papers in a quiet office, her hand steady. When asked for comment, she said only one thing: "I am choosing life." 3 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, reporters lining the walls, cameras pressed shoulder to shoulder. Outside, crowds gathered with signs calling for justice, their voices rising in unified demand. Inside, the air was heavy with expectation. Michael Carter sat in the witness section wearing the only suit he owned, bought secondhand and slightly loose at the shoulders. Daniel Brooks sat beside him, his posture rigid, his hands clasped. Sarah Collins filled page after page of her notebook, eyes sharp present. Across the room, Emily sat at the plaintiff's table, 8 months pregnant, her posture calm, composed. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back her face, free of artifice. She did not look at Jonathan Reed. Jonathan sat at the defense table, surrounded by attorneys whose reputations once guaranteed acquittal. He stared straight ahead, jaw-tight, expression unreadable. When Michael was called to the stand, the room stilled. He took the oath and sat, hands resting on his knees. The prosecutor asked him to describe the night of the gala. Michael spoke clearly, deliberately, recounting what he saw, what he said, what happened next. He described the slap, the fall, the silence that followed. He described raising his phone because he knew without proof the truth would die in that room. The defense attacked his credibility, his job, his motives. They suggested he wanted attention, money relevance. Michael listened without interruption, then answered with a calm that cut through the noise. "I spoke because it was right," he said, "not because it was safe." The security footage played next. The room watched as Jonathan pushed Emily, as Michael was struck, as the crowd stood frozen. Several jurors looked away. One wiped her eyes. Jonathan's face drained of color. Emily's testimony followed. Her voice faltered at first, then strengthened as she told her story from the beginning. The first slap, the apologies, the threats, the isolation, the fear of leaving, the fear of staying. She described spilling the champagne on purpose, her last attempt to be seen. When she finished, the courtroom was silent, not out of indifference, but reckoning. The jury deliberated for hours. When they returned, the verdict was delivered without hesitation. Guilty on all counts. Jonathan Reed's empire did not fall with fire or spectacle. It fell with truth spoken plainly, finally, beyond his control. The verdict did not feel like an ending. It felt like an exhale the world had been holding for far too long. When the judge read the sentence, her voice steady and unyielding, the courtroom remained silent, not from shock, but from gravity. Jonathan Reed was led away in handcuffs, his face stripped of the certainty that once protected him. Cameras flashed, reporters rushed, history moved forward. But Michael Carter barely noticed any of it. His eyes were fixed on Emily, standing slowly, one hand resting on her belly, her shoulders no longer folded inward. Fear was gone. In its place was something quieter and stronger. Freedom. Outside the courthouse, the noise surged. Supporters cried, strangers cheered, signs rose into the air, demanding justice that had finally arrived. Emily stopped just before the steps and turned toward Michael. She did not speak at first. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding on as if grounding herself in the moment. "Thank you," she whispered. Michael swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. "You gave yourself your life back," he replied softly. "I just refused to look away." Daniel Brooks stood nearby, his his hands clasped together, watching with a tired smile. He had lost a career he once thought defined him. But standing there, he understood something had replaced it. Purpose. Sarah Collins lowered her camera for a moment, letting the scene exist without a lens. She had told many stories in her career, but this one had changed her. It was not just exposure, it was transformation. Life did not suddenly become simple. Michael did not wake up the next morning to wealth or comfort. He still lived in the same Queens apartment, still drove the same aging pickup, still measured groceries carefully. But something fundamental had shifted. Doors began to open where walls once stood. Legal aid organizations offered support. Community members brought meals. Messages arrived from people who had watched his video and made choices of their own. I left him. I called the police. I spoke up. Michael read them late at night, sitting at the kitchen table long after Ethan had gone to sleep, understanding that courage had ripples he could not see. Emily gave birth 3 weeks later to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace, not after suffering, but after survival. Michael visited once, standing awkwardly near the hospital bed, unsure of his place. Emily smiled and held her daughter up gently. "She is alive because you spoke," she said. Michael shook his head. "She is alive because you endured." Emily did not argue. Some truths did not need consensus. As part of the settlement, the majority of Jonathan Reed's seized assets were placed under court supervision. Emily could have disappeared, then lived quietly beyond reach of cameras and questions. Instead, she asked Michael to meet her in an old abandoned community center in East Harlem, its windows boarded, its walls cracked. "I want to build something here," she said. "Something that outlives all of this. A place where women do not have to wait for a miracle to be seen." Daniel joined them. So did Sarah. Slowly, others followed. Lawyers who offered their time, therapists who volunteered hours, contractors who showed up with tools and no invoices. What began as an idea became work. The building was stripped down and rebuilt. Light replaced darkness. Rooms were painted. Doors were repaired. A sign was mounted above the entrance, simple and deliberate. Bright Haven. The opening day arrived quietly. No red carpet, no speeches written by committees, just people. Survivors, families, volunteers. Michael stood near the back, Ethan beside him, gripping his hand tightly. The boy had grown quieter over the past year, more observant. When Emily stepped onto the small stage holding baby Grace, the room stilled. A year ago, she said, "I thought my story would end in silence. I believed power was louder than truth. I was wrong." One man spoke, then another, then many. Courage did not save me. Community did. Applause filled the room, not thunderous, but deep and sustained. Daniel spoke next, his voice steady. "We did not build a building," he said. "We built a promise that no one here will be told to endure violence to survive. That promise will outlast us all." Afterward, people approached Michael one by one. A young woman with shaking hands told him she had left her abusive partner after watching his video. A middle-aged man said his company wanted to fund counseling programs. Each story added weight, not pride. Michael listened, nodded, hugged when words failed. Sometimes silence was the most respectful response. That evening, long after the center had emptied, Michael sat on the front steps with Ethan. The city hummed around them, alive and indifferent. Ethan leaned against his father, his stuffed bear tucked under one arm. "Dad," he asked, "are you famous now?" Michael smiled softly. "Nobody. I am just me." Ethan considered this, then nodded. "I am glad you did not stay quiet." Michael looked up at the sky, the stars faint but present beyond the city glow. He thought of all the nights he had mopped floors unseen, all the moments he had believed smallness was safety. "I am glad too," he said. He thought of Jonathan Reed now, a name spoken in court records instead of boardrooms. He thought of Emily walking freely with her child. He thought of Daniel finding purpose beyond survival. Of Sarah, whose reporting had finally been believed. Of himself still ordinary, still afraid sometimes, but no longer invisible. This story was never about a janitor or a billionaire. It was about choice, about the moment when silence feels easier than action, about the lie that one person cannot change anything. Michael had believed that lie once. He knew better now. One voice could interrupt violence. One camera could expose truth. One refusal to look away could ignite others. The world did not change because Michael was powerful. It changed because he acted anyway. As he rose from the steps and led his son home, the lights of Bright Haven glowed behind him, steady and warm. Proof that darkness does not disappear all at once. It recedes slowly when enough people decide to stand where the light can reach them. From a professional perspective, this story reveals a truth that research courtrooms and real life confirm again and again. Abuse does not survive because it is invisible. It survives because people are trained to look away. Power feeds on silence, and silence is often disguised as caution, politeness, or fear of consequences. What broke that cycle here was not wealth status or authority. It was moral clarity. One ordinary person recognized harm, accepted the cost of speaking up, and in doing so, shifted the balance of power. That is how real change begins, not with grand speeches, but with a single refusal to stay quiet. If this story moved, you do not let it end when the video ends. Stories like this matter only when they travel further than the screen. Take a moment to like this video so it reaches someone who may need it. Subscribe to the channel if you believe stories of courage, justice, and humanity deserve to be told and remembered. Each small action helps keep these voices alive. Most importantly, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment with just 2 words that capture what this story means to you. Stand up, be brave, speak out, choose one or write your own. Your voice matters more than you think.